he's taking like 32% of their shots. They're super reliant on him. They have a really young backcourt. What if they run into a team with a really good front court defensive presence?
Welcome to another episode of the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. And on this episode, I'm thrilled to have Andy Molitor of Betsperts on the show. Among other topics, we talk about his data-driven process for betting on college basketball. He gives us a team that he's looking to fade as we head into March. And we also talk about teams like North Carolina, Gonzaga, and Alabama. The Football Analytics Show is brought to you by the Power Rank Sports Betting Newsletter. This is a free service that strives to be three things. 1, valuable. 2, concise. 3, entertaining. Every Saturday, I send out a curated list of sports betting tips and analytics. For this upcoming Saturday, my guest on this podcast, Andy Molitor, has agreed to give us one of the games that he's betting on. In addition, you'll get my March Madness cheat sheet that makes it drop dead easy to fill out your bracket. To check out this free service, go to thepowerrank.com. That is my site for sports betting tips based on analytics. Once again, that's thepowerrank.com. Joining me on this episode of the podcast is Andy Molitor. He is the director of content at Betsperts, and he is also the co-host of a very popular deep dive gambling podcast. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ed. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. How's everything going for you?
Good. Yeah, as I mentioned, it's the transition time, isn't it? Which, honestly, I didn't even mention golf when I was talking about that earlier. It is kind of the transition for a lot of people who do start betting golf, I guess. They kind of ignore that month that happens during the NFL playoffs, playoffs, and then the real start of the season does begin. So, yeah, it's been a hard transition to golf. Trying to ramp up a little more on college basketball, obviously, is important time of the season coming around right there, and watching some other stuff too. Took in some XFL. NBA is starting to get towards this part of the season that matters towards players. People start to care a little bit as they have to get ready towards the playoffs when they have to actually care again.
Yeah. There's so much going on. Andy, I've been doing this for a while, and every year I'm used to this feeling after the Super Bowl, oh crap, I have 4 weeks until Selection Sunday. But again, this year, you get to the Super Bowl, you get after the Super Bowl, and oh crap, I have 4 weeks until Selection Sunday. So I definitely feel you, having to transition and doing all these different things. I know you were betting college basketball before, but now it's a little bit more serious now that football's over.
Yeah, and not only that, but just the crunch of all the games you're going to have. And it's silly because you should never bet on when the games are, but boy, people love and I'm a bettor first, but I'm a content creator too. And boy, do people love games that start at 10 a.m. Central. Once we get to conference tournament time, there's so many games that are happening just all day long, and people just eat that up. They love to bet on, it's it's the MAAC quarterfinals and, Manhattan and Iona here, but everybody's got to bet on it because it starts at, some of those are 8 a.m. on the West Coast for some of this basketball. So it is a really fun time too for, all those smaller conferences that you're not getting in unless you win this. You get upsets all the time. Just super unpopular opinion. And I actually backtracked on it in the chat just so I didn't have to argue, but I sort of like the 2 weeks of conference tournaments more than March Madness. And someone yelled at me. And I'm like, all right, I'll give you, I'd say that as a whole, the March Madness as a whole, but nothing does beat the first weekend of March Madness. That is just, that's the pinnacle of a 4-day weekend right there.
But I like the contrarian take, right? Because you're saying as a bettor, I like conference tournaments. Not everyone's paying attention. Probably there's more value for you, right? In terms of winning your bets. it's still an exciting time, but before the rest of the world pays attention. I like the contrarian take.
Yeah, and there's been, I mean, and just this is something you could preface almost anything with nowadays, I feel like. But there's been more lines and more lines for futures. Like 5 years ago, it was hard to find an outright price on like the Horizon League to win the tournament. You know, you'd go to a sports book, and you know this is before some of the legalized shops even were around. You know, we hadn't got to Pabst yet, and it was digging through offshores and paperheads and looking for these lines, and you just have basically the lines for the big six conferences, and that was it. And you dig around, and finally you'd find something on like the Mountain West or the American. Like now every book has them. I mean, I just seen the WinBet. Matt had tweeted something out minutes ago about some of the early prices he has for, I think it was the Horizon League, a couple of small conferences. There's already prices up for tournaments, and there's several games left in conference play yet. So way different than we were several years ago, and I love that too, because I love not only betting those but creating content around the conference tournaments. And I mean, usually every year I end up with at least one outright in every conference tournament, with some exclusions like, oh, Gonzaga's minus 2,000 and nobody else is very good. What are we going to do with this? Every once in a while that comes up.
Not this year. They might not even be the favorite.
Yes, it's a little bit different as we moved along from through their life cycle of being a powerhouse.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember last year, I think, Jim Sonis and I had you on Covering the Spread, and you were definitely digging into those conference tournaments, like finding the value, digging up the information that, others weren't, in terms of like an injury that could really impact like a small conference tournament. I presume all that work has been pretty profitable.
Yeah, it's usually found some nice long shots. Sometimes it is tough to make money in those just because there's a lot of variance, but not only just betting those futures, but betting game by game stuff in those conference tournaments is fun. And that, I mean, I feel like I've told this story, but a lot of that started as just me not understanding what was going on in these conference tournaments, and it changes still. Oh, it just changes every year. But like, I got to it one year, and I'm like, why the hell are they playing in Boardwalk Hall in New Jersey on a Tuesday morning? Just every conference does things so different. That's where I started digging in more. Was like, all right, like, what are we doing here? And you go and you do some research, and you look like this conference does home games for the first round, and then they reseed, and then they go to they go to a neutral site for the Final Four, and every 32 of these, and they do them all differently. And a lot of that research is what kind of led me to start betting into the conference tournaments a little more. Was figuring out like, man, I'm not even sure people understand what's going on with some of these games as they're betting into them. Like, half the people don't realize this is a neutral site at this point, I think. And, the bookmakers do it. I'm not to say that like the bookmakers don't know a neutral site game is occurring, but, there's just a lot of stuff that people are betting into those with like probably very limited knowledge. And that's where I enjoyed making some content around it. Like, hey guys, like before you get into this, realize like all the games are going to be played in Yale's home court here. It's like, nothing is truly neutral for them.
Absolutely. And I've had to dig in this because I have to tag every game as neutral, or, when I'm posting predictions, and you always get, I think it's like the American East that plays all home court throughout the tournament, right? So you're getting games sporadically. It's not like a tournament where you play night after night after night. It's still a tournament, but you're just traveling to home courts and things like that, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing too. There's some of them have a day or two off. Some of them you can play 5 games in 5 days. Where they do have everything at a neutral site at an event center. I think there's one. I'm trying to, maybe the Southland. There's one that's in like a big event center in Katy, Texas, and
I think Southland,
they have 2 courts, and they have the women's tournament going on the other side of a curtain. Like there's you can end up playing game after game after game right in a row.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And then the ones that I think are always interesting are the semi home courts, right, where you're playing in the town of one of the teams of the conference, but not on their home court.
Yeah, I'm trying to. I think it's Norfolk State. They have one of those where they're playing in like the Norfolk Scope, And it's
Yeah,
like,
that
hey,
sounds right.
this isn't their home court, but
Right.
it's like 5 minutes across town.
Yeah.
And like you mentioned, there are some spots like that where this is a neutral. It's a true neutral site, but this team lives or plays in the suburbs of this town. Like it's a 4-minute drive or something along those lines. I feel like we've had that too with the Big West, where they have it in Anaheim or something like that. It's like half these teams are LA teams. Like this isn't really a travel spot for some of these.
Right. Andy, I wanted to talk to you on the pod because we've talked to you about your football betting process, and I wanted to get the analogous thing for what you do for college basketball. So give us a sense for how you go about handicapping these games, whether you use numbers, bet spreads, or totals. Tell us what you do.
I do use numbers. A lot of it is just scraping, a lot of stats, and that's something I've improved on. I'd say like anybody who's taking on a sport. Well, there's not a lot of good analogs to college basketball. I was going to say taking on a sport with 350 some teams, but it's basically the only one unless you get real weird into some betting all the soccer leagues in Europe. But
right.
The more you can automate your process, the easier this is going to be. I was thinking about this the other day. How I did this early on in my process was I'd set up a spreadsheet with a bunch of stats, and I basically had two empty cells that were set up for VLOOKUP, and I would type the names in those two cells for a game, and then it would give me a number, and then I would do that with the next game. And I mean, I don't have to tell you how long that would take. This is like 6-7 years ago. That doesn't seem like that long, honestly. But the process was pretty poor at first, or time consuming. The more I've been able to learn about just scraping, data wrangling, data cleaning, data gathering, that's helped a lot. But a lot of it is just bringing in all the numbers and then trying to normalize them. I think there's some really good stats that have come around in years past that have done a good job of that, like wins above bubble and just, some of these adjusted metrics, adjusted defensive efficiencies that, do some adjusting for, hey, you didn't really play anyone, or, if you can do a good enough job of taking in some of the strength of schedule, strength of victory into it, I think that's some improvements I've made over the years. That said, this year it is mostly just stats based. I run my numbers. I have some things set up to give me a price for every line, every game that's going to happen. The biggest thing every year is fixing my numbers to adjust for, just fixing my my setup for the teams that appear out of nowhere, like Queens. And every year you have a couple of new teams, and you got to go in there and make sure everything's set up to not throw a bunch of errors at you when it doesn't recognize the name of a team. But I get my number. I compare it to the price. I look for discrepancies in the market. I try to do that as early as possible. I wasn't great about that during football season with the amount of time I spent on that and golf. So hopefully you can do a better job of actually betting into some overnights like I love to back in the day. But I make some, any discrepancies, make the short list, and then you start digging in a little. And I'd love to say it's mostly just research and, I go figure out, are there any injuries that are, if I make team A 3 points better than the line I'm getting over team B, and there's an injury I hadn't taken into account, or obviously my numbers aren't, I have to, obviously pass on something like that. If I'm not finding anything, after a little due diligence, I usually just end up making the bet. But a really big thing, I think, for any sport you're betting is just networking. And
Sure.
It sounds dumb to say, it sounds lazy to say, let other people do the work. But if you know a bunch of other people that are already doing the work, that's sometimes pretty huge, especially in a college basketball. There's so many teams. If you know somebody that specializes in a conference or bets into a certain conference a lot, and you're puzzling about a certain line, just asking them, and they say like, this guy's coming back off suspension, or there's something happening here, or they don't match up well against this zone. It's a great resource to have as far as, and honestly, it's the same as anything else. I'll never say like networking outside of just informational stuff. Like, obviously we had the national anthem or the halftime stuff a few weeks ago.
Yep.
Informational stuff is different, but it's not like I'm going to people and they're saying, no, this is a bet, go make this bet. And I'm adding a lot of bets off that. Usually it's the cases they're talking me out of a bet. And for the most part, I think that's been a net positive over the years.
Absolutely. Andy, I certainly don't want to ask you to give away your secrets, but can you think of like an example of, I mean, because there is a lot of college basketball data out there, whether you're talking about Ken Pom or Hoop Math or wherever all these places that you cool kids tend to hang out at. So there is some data out there. So I guess I'm interested in an example of where you thought, okay, well, I don't have enough data, so I'm going to go out and get some, and that's going to help my process.
Yeah, I guess as far as you mean, just after I've run everything in my numbers and I'm looking for more information?
Or maybe just something that goes into your numbers that you're using, right? That not everyone else is using, if that makes sense.
Yes, and sometimes it's just a matter of like these stats don't make sense. Like I got to go figure out why this team is doing this or what's happening here. Like why is this team? This team has a high 3-point percentage, but they're taking a very low ratio of their shots from deep. What kind of offense are they running, or what kind of defenses have they faced, or has it just been a really weird schedule that's causing this? Sometimes it's just digging in on stylistic stuff, I guess. And honestly, that's a pain. That's a huge pain to dig in on stuff like that, especially if it's a smaller school and you don't have a ton of information on it. And truthfully, too, you can just go do some Googling and looking into this. And the worst thing I've run into now is there's a lot of automated content that's just getting pushed out with like AI written stuff. And it listed. I ran into I couldn't throw them under the bus if I wanted to because I don't remember where it was from. But somebody listed a team and said they weren't very good from three. And they were ranked like 390th in the nation. There's not that many teams. It's like, well, this isn't helpful at all. But yeah. I do think that's usually where I do dig in on some other stuff. And like you mentioned, Ken Pom's great for just the basic info. If you want to just scrape all of the stats, or team rankings is another good one that's really easy to pull. I mean, you can just open a Google Sheets and use some import HTML and put the website in, and it's going to pull everything in for you. So those are great. Torvik is great. A lot of overlaps with Torvik and Ken Pom, but for sure, I've gone to others, just digging in, and I end up in a lot of goofy places. Usually articles, truthfully, is when I'm trying to figure out some stylistic stuff like that.
I figure if you're going to use AI to write your articles, maybe proofread them before you hit publish.
Yeah, I think the whole purpose is to mass produce them, but I almost feel like I should email them people now. It's just like, hey guys, this is clearly way off. Which I know you're trying to do good, but this is a bad one.
You can start it out, Andy, by saying, I know that the number of college basketball teams has increased over the past couple of years, but
it's gone up.
We're not quite at 390 yet.
Yeah, that was something. That stopped me for a second. It almost like full Mandela affected me. I'm like, no, that can't be. Like, it's 363, I thought. I should check that right now. It's like I'm saying this on a podcast. I feel like I should know the actual number. It is.
I'm pretty sure it's 363.
363. 363 is right. It just keeps changing on me.
Well, I have 363 teams in my numbers, so we're going to go with that. Although, I mean, I usually double check my stuff with Ken Pom at the beginning of the year. So if he's wrong, I might be wrong too. So do you find yourself usually betting spreads or totals or both?
This is a point of contention with me, like with myself. Like I'm mad at myself. I wanted to spend more time on totals this year and I just didn't get the chance. I think maybe that's another good piece of advice. Don't no half measures. Like I didn't think my stuff was good enough. I did some back testing. It wasn't to be betting into totals as much as I wanted to. I didn't have the time to tighten that up. So I mostly do just bet sides at this point.
Okay.
That's kind of my summer project. I spent a lot of time last year working on, some golf projects at work. I just didn't get the time in the summer that I wanted to spend on college basketball, which is disappointing. Right. But again, you only have so many hours in the day. You got to prioritize what you're doing. And the where I've gotten to in golf, where I've again automated some processes and streamlined some things. I hope to have a ton of time because I mean, just unless you're betting 5,000 a game and you're getting limited out, you should be betting totals. Like totals are going to be easier to beat. They're going to be softer. Just go to any book in the world, click a side, a total, and a money line, and see what the limit is on the side, see what it is on the total, and put 2 and 2 together. They're going to give you less of the total because it is just going to be an easier line to beat in general. So I've always wanted to spend more time on that and get better at it, even if it was derivatives, team totals, first half totals, second half live totals, something like that. But that is the plan for the year. The 2023-2024 season. Wow.
Yeah, time flies. Andy, it's tough with college basketball to ask you for a bet because just of the timing, there's games every night. But is there a team that you are either looking to bet on in terms of the spread or maybe fade against the spread that you could tell us about?
I thought about this a little, and it's a good analog to this is probably where we're at in the NFL. Drew Dinsick, the whale capper there, we kept running into this at the end of the season with the Wong teasers. They just kept getting better. I still need to do a deep research project into if that's been a thing, but we said like Wong teasers are based on the efficiency of the market, and the market gets more efficient and more efficient throughout the season. So why wouldn't, basic strategy Wong teasers do better at the end of the year? And I feel like that's kind of where I'm at with basketball.
Okay.
I earlier in the year, there are some teams where it's like, man, this team just keeps popping up as a bet on or a bet against. But as the season goes by, the efficiency of the market does start to kick in. You do see some adjustments on that. Whereas there's probably not teams where it's like, I'm looking to bet on or fade this team. I think that would be more of a case. Maybe we'll do when we get to the tournament. We can talk about that next. There's probably some teams I'd be looking to fade in tournament play as far as
excellent.
Maybe not even like betting against them against the spread, but looking to beat them in the horse racing sense of, hey, this is the favorite. This is the 1 seed. I don't think they're as good as they are or, as the market does. And I'm looking at somebody else to win this. You bet somebody else to make the Final Four. You bet somebody else to win that bracket, to win that region. I think there's some good ways to fade some teams in that way. But yeah, as far as we're at in the season, 30 games deep, it's tough because a lot of the market has caught up.
Oh, absolutely. And I definitely have some numerical evidence about how strong the college basketball markets are this time of year. It's not November and December anymore. But tell me a little bit more about teasers. With football, obviously, you want to tease through key numbers of 3 and 7. I think I bet my first teaser ever this season, and then I decided I kind of liked it, and it went well for a while. And then I had teased San Francisco against Philadelphia, and Brock Purdy gets his arm taken off.
Yeah,
which was a bummer. I really should have. That live line did not go as far towards Philadelphia as I thought it should have, and I really should have kind of hedged out of it there. But anyways, with football, you have this idea that you get this extra 6 points or however many points, right? I mean, you can tease any number of points these days. What's the similar idea in college basketball? Like, how can I implement that?
And that is the tough part about basketball, and that's the real sticker about teasers is if you go to your book and you click on teasers, or if you want to start adding them, they're going to offer you them on basketball. And I have this on my off-season to-do list is to really nail down like an old school bookmaker for an answer on this. But for the same price that they give you 6 points in football, they'll give you 4 in basketball, which is just Looney Tunes to me. There's no key numbers really in basketball, and that your average total. I don't know where we ended up for the year, but let's just for ease of use say somewhere in the 40s, and your average total in basketball somewhere in the 130s, or for Pete's sake, in NBA 200. The fact that you're getting so far, 30% fewer points in basketball than football. So I mean, the answer to betting teasers in basketball is just please don't do it. Totals too, because of the lack of the key numbers and the lack of the efficiency of some of the the markets. The distribution of results in a total is a lot bigger than spreads just in general in football, but in basketball it can be wildly huge compared to a football with how many points are scored. So the answer to teasing basketball is there's really no good way to do it.
Okay.
There's really no good way to make money. But with football, so much of it does rely on the fact that you get 6 points no matter where you're moving from. And if you can cross those key numbers where there's a high percentage of margins of victories, you're just getting extra value compared to moving in other places. And, you do see a little bit of keyness. That's probably not a word around, one or two possessions in basketball, but not nearly enough, especially and I don't have to tell you who's watched the end of a college basketball game where they start fouling and stuff.
Right.
That's maddening enough if you've bet the game. I can't imagine losing a teaser leg on that.
Right, for sure. I just thought you mentioned earlier that you were betting more college basketball teasers. Is that not the case?
No. I tried to make the comparison to football as far as the efficiency of the market. That's where we were saying towards the end of the year the NFL market got more efficient, which should make betting harder, but it ended up making teasers easier because those basic strategy teasers were based on the efficiency of the market. So it was kind of a thought I was pulling over from basketball.
Got it. Andy, when I look at my numbers, I'm kind of seeing a year of parity in college basketball. I don't really see any dominant teams like we've seen in past years. We already mentioned that Gonzaga is really not the team that they were last year. Would you agree with that statement?
Yeah, I think there's usually going in and anything can happen. You have surprise runs every year, you have surprise second weekend teams, you have surprise teams that make it to the Final Four, but there's usually a handful of teams like, all right, these are the teams that can win. And I don't know where, other people are at on that, but it seems like that number is bigger this year as far as, the clumping at the top. There isn't just 2 or 3 really good teams. It feels like there's 15 where, and even to Gonzaga, like maybe this would be funny. The year that they're not dominant, that would be great if they did make the final and finally won one. But
yeah.
You never know. Down through 3-4 teams in the Big 12. There's even a couple of mid majors if you want to. I'm probably going to start a petition to make the Mountain West not a mid major if they keep playing at this level. But San Diego State, that's a team that could make a deep run here. There's plenty of that, and obviously the top 5 is shuffled around a lot. But Houston, Purdue, UCLA, Bama, like they've just kind of been there for the last month or two, and probably that true upper crust. Like you do trust those teams, but Kansas, Texas, Baylor, Creighton, like there's just way more teams. It feels like this year. I do agree with your parity take.
Okay, I feel like as I've been kind of slowly digging into college basketball, it doesn't feel like there are a ton of superstars, kind of like there have been in the past. I mean, last year you had like Pablo Banchero and Chet Holmgren that were going to be top picks. The top 2 picks in the next NBA draft are not playing in college basketball right now, at least the 2 guys that we expect. And, we have some guys like, Brandon Miller at Alabama is, a player that I've been looking at, and Jarris Walker at Houston. And I think they're both good players, but they don't seem like transcendent players that can necessarily take over a game, although I wouldn't be surprised if Miller does because he kind of does have that upside. I mean, do you believe much in looking at the upside of individual players when you're looking at these tourney odds?
I think it depends on how the player is used, and it can almost be a detriment. And I think that's maybe why I'm a little down on Purdue. It's not only just because I'm in Big Ten territory and I've ended up catching a few of their games, but that guy does not get any calls, first off. Like, I don't know if it's just Big Ten basketball. Maybe this changes a little once we get to some refs that aren't from, up here. But, and Edey's just gets hacked constantly. And he's still taking like 30. And that's the key. he's taking like 32% of their shots. They're super reliant on him. They have a really young backcourt, and it's like, what if they run into a team with a really good, front court defensive presence? I'm thinking like USC from a couple years ago, where it's like nobody's getting inside on them. They're just so good, and they have to rely on some. I think your two backcourt starters are freshmen, and those guys are turning the ball over quite a bit. Like if you have a guy like that I don't bet into this market because I'm just horrible at it, never had luck, but I think he's favored to win the Wooden. I think he's a pretty big favorite to win the Wooden. I'd have to double check that. It's at least for sure a fine. Like you have a dominant player like this, and he's just getting hacked, and they're not getting the calls, and then we end up going up, maybe against some teams from different conferences, and they start to take him away, and he's still not getting calls, and then you're relying on all the role players that we haven't seen. Like you said, if you rely on one player to take that amount of your offense day in, day out, sometimes having a big star player like that can be a bit of a detriment. I don't know if there's actually any data to this either too, but sometimes I almost prefer a really dominant guard. Like give me somebody in the backcourt like that.
Right.
You've seen that from some of those runs, even some of the your little Cinderella runs. It's usually based around something like that, like we saw with Oral Roberts.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I kind of meant to ask you about Purdue. I think this is an interesting team because they really have killed it this year. But a team that started the season outside the AP top 25, and some of my research has shown that that's still a pretty good predictor. Kind of the wisdom of crowds take that's a good estimate of talent. And Purdue was outside the top 25, right? So no one thought much of their talent coming into the season. I think Zach Edey has certainly taken a step up from where he was last year, and that certainly propelled them to where they've gone, and one of the best teams in the nation, and certainly the numbers back that up. But when I watch this team, like if they need a bucket from someone besides Edey, it's like probably Fletcher Lawyer, right? The freshman.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at with this team, and they probably end up with a 1 seed, which is maybe like I spoke to before, maybe a region I would attack because it's maybe not a team I believe in as much. I think their defensive metrics are a titch lower, not like bad, but a titch lower than some of the teams I was looking at here in the kind of my top 5, my top 10. Yeah, 22nd in adjusted defense, and like you said, the guards there, man. Yeah, it's the turnover numbers too. Now I'm pulling this up. Extra possessions for the other team aren't going to be good when you're playing maybe an unfamiliar opponent, when you're playing on a neutral site like that, and somebody's able to even, maybe Edey is like a Barry Sanders. You're never going to stop the guy. You just have to, if you can limit him and try to make everyone else pick up the slack, then we're going to have some problems. And Purdue has scuffled a little bit of late. The Big Ten I'd say the Big Ten is fairly strong. It doesn't have a super high top end, but they've taken some losses here, mostly on the road, but the tournament's played mostly on the road as well.
Absolutely. I think of Zach Edey's Barry Sanders, that's pretty good.
Yeah, different body types for sure, but
probably the polar opposite body type, honestly, if you think about it. But if you want to equate the performances, but I guess Barry Sanders in the NFL for a long time didn't have much help on those Lions teams, right? And that's kind of the analogy that you're bringing up.
Yeah, you'd need, I think, like you mentioned, Fletcher Lawyer. If you want a deep run, you're probably going to need some big games from him as well,
right?
Or at least good to above average games, because it's hard to just be drug all the way to the. I don't know. I'm gonna have to go back and look at teams that have done it with just like a dominant big man.
Well, I mean, I'm going to guess that you're not going to find many of those, just with the way that the game has evolved and more importance of wing players, right?
Yeah, I think if I find it, I might be going back a bit.
Right.
Hey, this is a good team in '88.
Right.
So, yeah, exactly. Good point there.
All right. So Purdue is a team that you think is, good, but maybe someone that you want to fade in the tournament when they're 1 seed in a particular region. Is there another team like that you wouldn't mind telling us about?
this is more just personal preference. I'd like Gonzaga to do poorly.
Okay.
I bet them preseason. They, team didn't really live up to my expectations. I ended up cashing that ticket out for a little, seriously, like a 1% profit. Just I was just happy to take anything at that point to get that ticket off my ledger. And now they're playing better. Like it's that revenge game. They're looking like a team that could play at a high enough level to make it deep, and it's an experienced team. There's some guys on here that have done this a couple times. You've got a good coach. The losses, like you lose to St. Mary's in overtime on the road. That's whatever. St. Mary's this is one of the better St. Mary's teams they've ever had. Like you lost to Purdue, you lost to Baylor, and you lost to Texas. Those are all pretty much top 10 teams. None of those were at home. The Loyola Marymount thing was troubling because there was a few close games. Like BYU was close. I think San Fran and maybe another one earlier was kind of close. And then they lost that Marymount game. It's like, man, is this team even, a top 10 team at this point? But I mean, the turnaround and just absolutely hammering Marymount on the turnaround and looking like they should cruise to a couple wins. Although I'm very much looking forward to this Saturday. Like, there's probably better games on, but I will be trying to find that St. Mary's Gonzaga game. Guessing that'll be later in the day, but that should be a good one, especially as conference tournament is probably about 4 or 5 days after that one. So looking forward to that. But selfishly, I'd like them to not go far because I'll be pissed about hedging out of that ticket. But it's still a very high end offense. It's one of the best offenses in the country. You can say what you want about their strength of schedule, but they've really ramped it up. Like I mentioned, all those teams in their non-conference play, they beat Alabama, they beat Michigan State, they beat Xavier. They really do go through the meat grinder in the non-conference now because of playing in a weaker conference. It does help a little bit with the committee, I suppose. But like I mentioned, St. Mary's is very good. BYU, Santa Clara, decent. Yeah, I'm trying to make a case for some teams that definitely aren't, in the tournament, but playing against St. Mary's in that non-conference schedule probably does them a little bit of good. But I think they might just be kind of neutral to me right now as far as backing or fading once we get to tournament time, depending, where they land in the brackets.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Gonzaga is definitely a team that you are interested in. I think it's interesting, right? Because they've had 2 straight years of an elite NBA prospect. And not just elite, not just going high in the NBA draft, but 2 players that I thought were better on the defensive side of the ball than on offense, in Chet Holmgren and Jalen Suggs. And now you don't have that guy, right? And as you mentioned, like there's no shortage of talent on this team, but they're just not as good defensively, and probably worse than you would expect in terms, from just losing one single dominant defensive player. So Andy,
defense is, defense is obviously the huge question mark. The offense will look good in March, but it's right. If they can stop anybody.
Exactly. So Andy, that actually prompted me to do a study because I've heard a couple people have the hypothesis that, an offensive team, you're just good on offense, right? But like if you're not a good defensive team during the regular season, like, can you just get better in the tournament because the stakes are higher? And can you just get better on defense simply because of effort? So
I think that's more at the next level. You see that all the time in the NBA. It's just, they're going to play defense now, but I'm not so sure. That's interesting.
Yeah. You want to take a guess at the result?
I'm guessing it's probably not a thing, but it's also interesting to look at some of the really the Power 6 teams that, the matchups they have early in the tournament against some pretty low end teams. So I wonder if that skews things a little.
That's a good extra thing. So I just finished up the study this morning and I found nothing. Higher some years, lower some other years. I haven't done, I haven't taken the average of how much better these teams are. So like, I did it so that like I eliminated you if you were like a top 25 defense, right? Because I don't care about you. We know you're going to probably play pretty good defense.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So you take anyone outside the top 25 and, some years they did better, some years they did worse. And I think when you average it out over whatever 10 tournaments, it's going to be, basically like my adjusted efficiencies are going to be pretty spot on in predicting what happens. But it might be interesting if you if you did that and maybe looked at teams with talent, like Power 5 teams, right? Like teams that we know are going to tend to have more athletic talent. Of course, that gets really hard because now you're starting to restrict your sample size and you have to hand put Gonzaga in, right? Because they clearly have talent. So
yeah, I wonder, and again, you'd be running into such a small sample size, but I wonder about the, for lack of a better term, the foregone conclusion teams. Like, hey, Gonzaga for years, where it's just like, did your defensive numbers look poor because you were coasting, or like Colgate for when they were just, and I think they still are, Vermont for a while, where this team is just going to win the conference, and you wonder if their defensive metrics kind of troughed a little based on just coasting through an easy conference schedule when they're the clear class of it. So, and maybe less so this year with St. Mary's being so good, but Gonzaga is kind of the test case for that at a bigger level.
Yeah, for sure. But of course, like if you're putting one team as a test case, it's
you have no prayer
for sample size, right? So yeah, it's interesting. All right, Andy. So another team I wanted to ask you about is North Carolina. They returned all but one player from a team that made it to the title game, started number 1 in the preseason polls, and they might not actually make the tournament. And I think this is particularly interesting because I was pretty critical of just promoting Hubert Davis to run the program, a guy who had never been a head coach before, promoting him to take over after Roy Williams left. And of course, they make it straight to the title game and make me look like a fool. But now things are kind of coming back. So, what are you seeing with this blue blood?
I think I'm at the point where they weren't that good last year. Like it was just a good March. Right. They didn't perform that well in the ACC tournament. I think they're out in the second round, or I think maybe a bye there. They do their tournament a little goofy, but they only won one game, lost to VTech. Now that I'm looking at it, and then it was just after that Baylor win, it was kind of lights out for a while. Like they played really well. It was just kind of a hot run. Sometimes you have a hot run in the middle of the season, and sometimes you have the hot run as an 8 seed in the tournament, and you make it as far as they did all the way to Kansas. And at that point, they were kind of banged up. Like they probably, fully healthy the way they were playing, they might win that game. That was a close game as well. So, I think I'm on board with they should never have been ranked where they were preseason, just based off the run. And, they returned a lot of players, but I don't think there's a really good explanation for what's going wrong. Like you can look at the stats and say, well, you're shooting 3-pointers at nearly unsustainably horrible level. Like if you keep doing that, you're just not going to win games. And, after the loss, when was that the other day, Sunday, I think they're out. Right. Not to say you go beat Virginia, go beat Duke at home, you're back in. But I think right now as it stands, I'm not sure they're in. I'd probably say 70-30 they're out. I'd have to go check what the bracketology site says. At least, best case, like last 4 in, kind of a play-in team, but they're at a spot here that's crazy considering where they're ranked preseason. And a lot of it too is the end of game stuff. If games ended at 35 minutes, I think they'd have a lot better record. They've had a bunch of games where they've been really close or leading late and just went on big scoring droughts late in the game. And then it's what I said before with the 3-point shooting. Once you end up behind late, you have to start taking threes. And if you're going to shoot threes at the clip there, 30.6, 334th in the nation from 3-point right now. Like compared to what they were, compared to where they were shooting last year, 5% better, which the way you say it, 5% doesn't sound like much, but
it's a lot. It's a ton.
Yeah, 35.8 last year. Like if you just stop making threes, you stop being completely good at something you were good at, and you can't play well at the end of games, you're going to end up, what are they, 8-8 in conference right now? Yeah, they're dire straits right now for them. They're heading to New York to play NIT,
right?
man.
Well, if they make it all the way to New York.
Yeah.
It obviously hurts not to have Brady Manick when you're talking about their 3-point shooting percentage. And then I'll also bring up the memory of being at Bet Bash and watching Duke versus North Carolina in the Final Four. I had a pretty nice, I think I want to say like 16 or 17 to 1 on Duke to win the entire tournament.
Oh, man.
And North Carolina got them. And it was so frustrating because I'd been very vocal on a couple podcasts that Brady Manick cannot guard anyone on that Duke team. But he had a couple of decent defensive possessions towards the end of that game that really helped them get over the hump. So that was kind of extra infuriating. I did hedge out, but it was one of those hedge outs where like you still want your future to win, right?
Yeah, no, I've been there. It's so hard. I've almost all but given up on betting March Madness or NCAA tournament futures. Anything I place will be after the draw. I've done that a couple times. I've had some luck. Honestly, I shouldn't say some luck. I had Virginia when they won it. If you remember any of those games, the end of those games, I had a lot of luck.
Yeah.
Like I had all the luck. Maybe I should never bet one again because I've used my luck up on that team.
No, absolutely. I mean, the year that Virginia won it all, they were my contrarian choice to be champion. So for a lot of people's pools, so a lot of people end up winning their pools that year. And like, yeah, I remember. I mean, they probably shouldn't have beaten Auburn, right? They had that foul call towards the end in the Elite Eight game, and a lot of things went well. I mean, you need luck to win the NCAA tournament, right? And I think, and I would argue you need more luck this year. I just don't see. I really like this Houston team. I think they're going to be the favorite. They are the betting favorite, and I think they deserve to be there. I feel like Kelvin Sampson's probably the best coach in America right now. I mean, what he gets these guys to do on defense is unbelievable, but they are far from unbeatable, right? I mean, even the quote unquote unbeatable of what I thought of that Gonzaga team last year. It's nothing like that.
Yeah, that would have been. I had futures on them. I think I've had futures on Gonzaga every year. It's just kind of my yearly donation. So that team would have been nice. But yeah, Houston's great. Bama will be interesting. I don't know. I don't want to get into the weeds too hard on the legal situation that might just occur. But things, if he ends up having to sit out, a team is considerably worse. And
for sure,
again, that's a lot of moving parts going on. I don't have all the details there, but things change considerably on the 1 seed line if Bama is down a player or two.
No, for sure. The player in question is Brandon Miller, the super talented freshman. Apparently, he gave a gun to someone who then murdered someone. So currently, there are no charges. But I think that seems interesting because only 2 of their players play a significant amount of minutes. Miller, and then I can't remember his name, but the guard that transferred in from Ohio. And even guys like Javon Quinterly, who have played massive minutes for Alabama before, don't play massive minutes anymore, right? So particularly reliant on Miller and his shot making. So definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, Mark Sears.
Yeah.
Ohio Bobcats. Yeah. That's a fun one.
Well, and
that'll be interesting to see. I think they play tonight. And the fact that I haven't heard anything, it kind of just sounds like that we're gonna have a full roster. There's actually everybody plays tonight. Bama heads to South Carolina, Houston, Tulane. A bunch of the top 5 play tonight. That'll be fun.
Yep, as always. So, Andy, I'm really looking forward to this part of the show because the last time, the part of the show where I ask you about non-sports questions, the last time you were on the show, you recommended to me a number of things. 2 of them were brown liquor, Angel's Envy and Whistle Pig, and I now simply adore those whiskeys and I'm very grateful for your recommendations. You also talked about Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, a short little novella, which I found to be amazing. Probably one of my 2 favorite books that are that short. The other one's a book called Pedro Paramo, which is some magical realism, which is also amazing. So anyways, I wanted to thank you for those great 3 recommendations. And I wanted to ask you if there's anything else that you'd want to recommend to me and everyone else. It can be a show, podcast, piece of art, literally anything.
Man, I wish I had some podcast recs. Anything I'm on, I guess. But Drew asked me that the other day too. He said, "What non-sports podcasts are you listening to?" I'm like, "I've got nothing. I've had no time to listen. I just have had no time."
That suggests you have time to listen to sports podcasts, which is something that I'm struggling with.
Yeah, I listen to a few, but as a sports content creator, sometimes I hate doing that too because it just feels like you end up melding into some groupthink and regurgitating things you heard, and whether you believe it or not. So I've almost veered away from some of the NFL stuff I used to listen to. I do enjoy listening to Nate Duncan on NBA stuff as little as I bet NBA. He's very smart. And you know what? I do have some books.
Yeah, let's do it.
Been reading a lot of Cormac McCarthy.
Oh, wow. Like the new one?
Yeah, I haven't got to the new one yet.
Okay.
Not to the new one, but I know I'd read one or two way back in the day, and I end up just going back and reading all of them almost here. So I don't know what the new one is even called, but the new one is on the list. I don't either. I really, really enjoyed The Road. I really enjoyed Blood Meridian. I haven't read No Country for Old Men because I saw the movie, but kind of been working through those. And then another friend of mine, a guy who bets quite a bit of tennis, he recommended the Altered Carbon series. As far as it's a Netflix show, another show I haven't seen because I haven't had time. Somebody said the show's not as good as the book, which is usually the case. But the first book is just called Altered Carbon, and it's very good. It's kind of has a Blade Runner, has a Blade Runner feel. It's like in the future, but a little bit of noir. So I like that quite a bit. So some good reading over the winter, and the plan is to listen to podcasts in the summer when the garden is up, because I can just throw them on the on the Bluetooth speaker up in the garden.
Very nice. For Cormac McCarthy, which book do you recommend starting with?
Oh, probably The Road or The Crossing. Those are good ones. It's a unique style of writing. It takes a little
for sure,
to, but it's it's an easy read for the most part.
Okay. Very nice. And then the second one you mentioned is Altered Carbon, like you would alter
exactly.
Molecular structure.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Very nice.
I'm sure I can think of the name of the Richard Morgan. Just Googled it.
Richard Morgan. Okay. I will check that out. My son is very interested in writing stories that eventually get made into movies or series. So I'm trying to pull all of it that I can. I'm going to try to make him the first person in the history of humanity to read Shawshank Redemption before seeing the movie, because everyone's seen the movie, right?
Yeah.
And supposedly that is one of the few cases in which the movie is better than the book.
Yeah, I feel like I've read. I think it's like isn't it just a short story and like a little
short story
compilation of short stories?
Yes, exactly. So I looked maybe 5 years ago, and it was, exactly as you said. It's like a short story in some other King compilation that I couldn't find on Amazon, or maybe I didn't look hard enough. That seems kind of stupid to say, right? You couldn't find something on Amazon.
Yeah,
but they have just released like a standalone little. It's like 80 pages, so you can just get the Shawshank Redemption, and it's sitting somewhere on our bookshelves somewhere. So this is the fun of having kids, right? You just like. Wait, you're interested in reading? All right, here we go. Let's go. How about this book? How about that book? Right?
Yeah, it's crazy. And you're right. Like it's so unmemorable because I for sure I found the book at like the library and I read it and I remember being disappointed. And it's also crazy, and kudos to the filmmakers, I guess, to make such a sprawling movie out of a short story. It seems like the Benjamin Button. That's an F. Scott Fitzgerald story, and it's super short. And again, they turned that into like a 3-hour movie.
Right. I have Johnny Mnemonic on my phone. It's like 12 pages. And somehow they took that and made that into a movie. I don't think the movie was very good, but
I haven't seen that in a long time. Maybe I should go revisit some old Keanu. Go watch Point Break.
Exactly. So yeah, no, I think the process of written word to other medium is pretty interesting. And also, like, we've also been watching The Last of Us.
Oh God, yeah, for sure. That's the one show I have made time for of late.
Exactly.
I don't always get to it on Sundays, but I get to it.
Yeah. So my son suggested that we watch it, and I really didn't want to halfway through the first episode, and but yeah, since then I've been hooked, and I'm almost never like watching the show that everyone else is watching. So I feel kind of grateful that I'm actually like, in with all the rest of the cool people in the world, right? Watching this as well.
That does, as much time as I spend on social media, sometimes it does suck to not be watching the thing everybody's talking about at the time. Like I bet golf. I spend a lot of time talking to people about golf. I have to catch up on the Netflix series because everybody's like watched all of them, and I'm through like one episode at this point.
Yeah, it's a busy time, man. I mean, that can happen in April. For sure, right? The week before the Masters, right? You don't have any work that week, right? So
yeah, I know. I just gotta take a Saturday and do nothing, watch a bunch of TV.
Yeah, awesome. All right, Andy. Next question: you will be held in captivity for a year without the internet. However, you can bring one small item to help pass the time. What are you going to bring?
I didn't know if this was cheating to. Is a notebook with a pencil with it? Is that cheating? It's like two things. I think I'm going to do that because you could write, you could draw, you could, I guess play games with yourself, draw out scenarios. I've tried to think of something, and that's an impossible question, man. I feel like almost it'd have to be something like that with versatility, because anything else small, you'd get awful bored pretty quick.
Yeah, for sure.
Man, would I miss the internet?
What would you write?
Oh, I'm not sure. If I had all that time, who knows? Maybe I would write the Great American Novel. I've never sat down and tried to write anything outside of just some sports betting content. That'd be interesting to try to sit down and write some fiction for once.
Absolutely. I mean, the Great American Novel always comes out of the Midwest, right? With the down home values, right?
Yeah.
So awesome. All right, Andy, last question. If you could be one historical figure, who would you be?
Something like this came up the other day with my wife. Similar. I think it was, so speaking of people never watching the show when it's on, she didn't watch Game of Thrones.
I didn't either.
She asked about it, and I'm like, well, if you want, I'll rewatch it with you. I've seen them. So rewatch that. And one of her takeaways, and it was just like, man, it would suck to not be, royalty, or at least, own some lands back then. I think that, being poor in America, being homeless, like, I don't want to take away from that in today's society, but I think it sucked even worse back then. So I don't even know if it mattered. Like, as long as the person had money, to live sort of comfortably, like Carnegie, Rockefeller, that sounds good. If you had to live back in history, because, man, you really had to scratch out a living if you didn't have cash back in the day.
For sure.
We'll go Carnegie. He has the same name as me.
Yeah, for sure. Wait, just because of his name, or is there something else about Carnegie that is enticing?
I'm sure. The money? I mean, yeah, I think it probably the money, but also that's a good one too. That's not like, I'm probably going to go have to do research because I'm speaking out of turn here. He probably was a bad guy, as it turns out, as I'm like trying to prop him up. But, he's, most industrials probably weren't super on the level all the time, but, he helped along with the, the boom of industry as we went along in the late 19th century, early 20th century.
Right. Yeah, no, for sure. I think,
and the money had to be a billionaire for sure.
Oh, for sure. Right. I mean to create all those institutions and all the philanthropy that he did. And I'll take this opportunity to remind you, Andy, that no one's perfect. So it's just that we hear more about the flaws of those types of people, right? Because there's biographies written about them, and then some people the Carnegies of the current age who are trying to do great things but get sidetracked buying a social media company. they just put all their flaws just out in the open, right?
It's an excellent segue. Yeah, if Carnegie had Twitter, who knows, he might have been problematic.
Andy Molitor, thank you so much for your time and helping me break down college basketball. Please let everyone know where they can find you.
Yeah, on the Twitter, mostly the Twitter, as we just talked about, at AndyMSFW. Do the deep dive. We're only doing it once a week in the off season for the most part. Wednesdays. Trying to kind of take a break from the grind of the NFL season. I'm sure there'll be some weeks where we do 2. The NFL draft is coming up. We'll have lots of stuff to talk about with that. But
so much, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, twice a week, every week during the NFL season, though, for sure. And then Brown Bag Bets every day on the same YouTube channel on Betsperts Media YouTube. Myself and Noops break down what we're gambling on that day, every day, 5 days a week. And Betsperts Golf. I do content over there. I'm betting golf every week, which is a grind in and of its own, but it's a lot of fun because your bets aren't usually dead on day one.
Right.
Some of mine are, but you get 4 days of sweat out of a lot of those.
Yeah. No, that sounds fun. Tell me a little bit more about what's going on at Betsperts.
Yeah, we've it's a lot different than when I started. When I started, it was just, myself and Reed and a couple other people. And now with some of the acquisitions, we have our hands in a lot of things. Acquired 4for4 fantasy football and betting. They do a lot of, redraft fantasy content. That stuff's great all year long. I give them a lot of credit for fantasy because I hate taking care of like waivers and stuff. So I just use their stuff. I draft really well, and I do good enough to keep me happy and not losing money on fantasy. So a lot of credit to them for the draft content they put out. And DLF we acquired, which is a Dynasty League football, which is a lot of fun. If you like to play fantasy all year round, they have that. I haven't got into that yet. I feel like that's going to be my next absolute time suck. A lot of those leagues. A lot of those leagues form this time of year, Ed, because you're waiting. You're waiting for the draft. You're waiting for you draft your players and then you fill it in with a rookie draft afterwards. So that's been a lot of fun, and those are kind of the big ones.
That's
lot of
interesting
fantasy stuff,
right? Because Betsperts, you guys started as mostly betting, but the acquisitions are in fantasy football. Yeah,
and along with that, Matthew Berry's Fantasy Life app, we acquired that as more of a way to get some of the news out for everything else we do. There's a really that's blown my mind. It's the ravenous community of people who love fantasy and want to talk about it, man, almost all year round. And I think Dynasty has done a big service to keep it going year round too. And then with the kind of the success of Underdog and other companies, best ball is really starting to take off. So seeing some best ball content come from especially 4for4, and that's been fun too. Especially for me, there's been golf best ball, and you see everybody's doing baseball best ball now. That's probably the next evolution for fantasy.
Andy Molitor, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, appreciate it. Good luck this March. Hopefully your brackets are all green.
Yeah, let's hope for the best. I'm certainly going to be putting in the work so people can have those brackets. Thanks again, Andy. This is Ed Fang, your host for the Football Analytics Show. I'm honored that you have listened all the way to the end with that excellent conversation with Andy Molitor. I know I had a great time talking with him, and I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Just a reminder, you can get my free sports betting email newsletter. This Saturday in my Nuggets, I will send a bet that Andy has made on a college basketball game. You can check this out at thepowerrank.com. The Football Analytics Show is also supported by listeners like you. Thank you to all the kind, generous people who donate. If you sign up to support the podcast on Patreon, you'll get an episode about how to win your NCAA tournament pool. This is an episode that gets right to the heart of my book about how to win your tournament pool. I assume that you understand that you should use analytics and that you know that you shouldn't get into a pool too big. And in this audio episode, I dig directly into contrarian strategies. Those are going to be really important this year. That episode is going to drop at the end of the month. If you would like to support the podcast through Patreon and get this episode about how to win your March Madness pool, go to patreon.com/footballanalytics. Patreon is Patreon. Football Analytics is all one word. My name is Ed Fang, your host for the Football Analytics Show. We are in our month of college basketball this month. I will have much more content for you soon, and I will talk to you soon.